We're going to see a picture of the Peter Kloffenstein family, and his wife was Mary Kloffenstein. And here is a picture of the family, taken when the children were quite young yet. In the back row, we have Emma to the far left, and then Aldine and Henry and Amanda and Noah. In the bottom row is Grandpa Peter Kloffenstein, and then Mary, that we call Aunt Babe, and she always said she was the prettiest one in the family. And if you went to her house, she had umpteen wigs. She would always change her wigs to look different. I just dearly loved her, but one bad thing she had 2 daughters, and the one looked like her husband, Uncle John, and she thought she was very, very pretty, so she always bragged about Betty. But Wanda looked exactly like Aunt Babe, and she didn't think she was nearly as pretty, so she always favored Betty. She was married to one of my favorite uncles, John, and he was a wonderful man, except he had a real bad drinking problem and ended up in Richmond because he drank so much his mind was totally destroyed. Then in the middle is Ida, who is my mom, and she's pouting because she didn't like the way her hair looked. And then Aunt Tilly was a little older than Mom, and she was married to Uncle Bill. I always liked Aunt Tilly too. She wasn't, she didn't become well, she was saved when she was a young girl, but she didn't live for the Lord for many, many years, and then in her later years she was a wonderful Christian lady. And her husband was a nice uncle too, but he too had a drinking problem for a long time until he was older, and he was all right. They had some children, and Gerald and I led 2 of those children to the Lord. My mom said, "You go talk to them," and we were able to lead them to the Lord. And Albert, who was the youngest in the family, he only lived to be 33 years of age. And then Grandma Mary Kloffenstein. This is Grandma Mary Kloffenstein when she was about 18 years of age. When she was a young girl, she wanted to be a missionary, but she wasn't able to go to school because they didn't have the money, and she also got pregnant and had to get married, and she always regretted that very much because she felt that the Lord's first will for her life was that she be a missionary. She ended up being a mother of many children, and some of those have been missionaries. Some of her offspring have been missionaries. She died when I was in 1944. Cloetta and I were in Bible college. Cloetta was a junior. I was going to be a senior. And my mom had to take care of Grandma Mary. And my mom almost got sick taking care of her, and she said, "One of you girls is going to have to stay out of Bible college and help me take care of Grandma." Well, Cloetta didn't want to because she wanted to keep going to school, and I didn't want to because it was my senior year in high school. So we prayed that somehow the Lord would work it out so we could both go to Bible school. And Grandma Mary died in August, and Bible school started in September, so we both got to go to Bible school. This is what? Oh, right before our senior year in Bible school, Grandpa, one night we were having convention in Fort Wayne in the tent on the campus of Fort Wayne Bible College, and Grandpa hadn't been very nice to me all summer. I had a birthday in July, and he usually came down to see me for my birthday, but he didn't this year. He just gave me some money, sent me some money in the mail, and this made me mad, and I was going to send the money back to him, but I decided that I could spend it and get myself something. I needed the money. Well, anyway, when we went to this conference, he said, "Do you want to go out tonight?" And I said, "Yeah." And so we drove down to Foster Park, and he told me he didn't want to go with me anymore. So I was kind of unhappy, pretty unhappy. And Grandma was at our house at that time in bed in our living room, and she sensed that something was wrong, so she asked me what was wrong, and I told her that my boyfriend broke up with me. And then she took me by the hand, and she sang the song, "What a Friend We Have in Jesus," and told me that when our friends here on earth do something to hurt us, we always have God, our Heavenly Father, who is our friend forever. And I always appreciated that. This is Grandma and Grandpa. They were probably in their 30s, 40s then. Grandma always dressed old-fashioned. She always looked like a grandma as long as I can remember. But she was a nice grandma. My grandpa was not a Christian. He was a nice grandpa, but he was a farmer. They had 50 acres, and he also was a whittler. He had a stand in the kitchen, and he would straddle the stand like a piano bench, and then he would whittle axe handles and hammer handles. They were smooth and shapely. He just had a real skill for that, and he would sell a lot of those. He became a Christian then a while before he died, but Grandma always prayed for him that he would come to know the Lord. This is Mary Kloppenstein's mother, and her name was Marian Amstutz. We never knew her. All my great-grandparents died before I was born, but my mother always said she was a wonderful, wonderful grandma. She never knew her grandpa, but she said Grandma Marian Amstutz was a very, very wonderful grandma. This is Grandpa Peter Kloppenstein's family. The these are his sisters, sister, and then his wife, Grandma Mary, and then three more sisters, and the husbands are in the background. And my grandpa is the second one, and the third one didn't have a wife. I don't know if his wife died or what happened to her, but that was Jacob Kloppenstein. I'd have to look at the back of the picture to remember their names. Now, Peter and Mary had a family of 11 children. Their oldest child died at birth. Her name was Lillian. And then she had a son, Harvey, who was a cripple, and he lived to be 21, but he never walked or talked. He always was in a high chair. And Grandma always said that she felt that though God had forgiven her for getting pregnant out of wedlock, she was punished with two children, like a crippled boy and a baby that died. She felt that was her punishment. Uncle Henry was the second child, and he married Phyllis, Aunt Phyllis. Uncle Henry was quite a character. He's my uncle who lived to be almost just a few months from being 100 years old. He was a missionary to Africa for one term. Two of his daughters were born there, and he was a minister for a number of years. And then he was a farmer. He lived close to Grandma and Grandpa on the farm, by the farm, but he soon moved up to the Albion area where he had many, many acres of land. Aunt Phyllis died. She had Alzheimer's. She lived 9 years, and Uncle Henry took care of her during those years. She was a real sweet aunt. And this is Uncle Henry, his graduation picture from Moody Bible Institute, where he graduated before he became a missionary. He's the one who was angry when Mom was born that she wasn't a boy, because he always wanted Mom to work with him out in the field because she worked so hard. and he was a very wealthy man. He gave his children lots and lots of money, and Mom told him he ought to give her some. So he gave her $20 once, and she thought he could give her more, and then for her birthday he gave her $100 for working for him so hard in the fields. This is Albert, the youngest child, and he never married. He was in World War I and came home, was blessed to be able to live through it, and he always lived with Grandma and Grandpa, and a lot of times when I would go stay at Grandma's house for like a week to help her with work, Uncle Albert had a bedroom upstairs, and she had a great big upstairs, and I had a bedroom at the far end of the hall. And if he hadn't been upstairs, I would have been scared to death, because when you're all alone and you're just a child, it's kind of creepy to sleep in a bedroom all by yourself. And then they hear the owls at night, and Grandma used to say whenever you hear owls howl, it means somebody's going to die, so I was always afraid to wake up and find out who died, but no one ever did. But he was in a bad accident. He built bridges on the highway, on roads, and he was hurt in an accident, and then later on had cancer and died at age 33 with cancer. This is Grandpa Peter and Grandma Mary with their clan. It's Uncle Noah in the background, and Aunt Aldine in the back, and Uncle Henry, and Albert, and then the front row is Aunt Emma and Aunt Tilly, and then my mom is near the right, and then Aunt Babe, the youngest one, who is really Aunt Mary, is on the complete right, the farthest right. My grandma, as long as I can remember, always had a great big tummy. You can see all that. She always had a big tummy. We went to her house a lot when she got older. My mom would do her wash every week, and we girls would go and help. I always loved going to Grandma and Grandpa's, because every time we'd get there, no matter if we just got up from the kitchen table, we were hungry for cookies and milk. She made the best sugar cookies and milk. And we always had that every time we went there. We'd go there one Sunday and to Grandma Egley's the other Sunday, so we were always back and forth, the grandparents. Here are the girls again. Aunt Emma and my mom Ida, and Aunt Babe, Tilly, Amanda, and Aldine. All the girls that lived, and the two boys weren't on that picture. My mom was born in a log house on this farm, but it was torn down, and then my Grandpa Peter built this brick house. And we used to play a lot in the yard every other Sunday. A lot of the cousins would come, and we would play Mother May I in the front yard there. And in the house, my Uncle Albert had a deck of cards, and we would like to play cards, and Grandma would say, okay, you can play cards, but the minute anyone starts to argue, the cards go back in the box. So, we have a picture on video of Grandma's house as it looks today in the year 2000, but back when they lived in this house and we used to visit there all the time, it had this porch on, which is not the way the present porch looks, and there's no fence around the yard now, but we always had a fence around Grandpa's yard. Just 40 rods down the road was the United Brethren Church, Winchester United Brethren Church, where my mom went all her life. And when I was in the 5th through the 7th grade, we went to this church because we were too poor to buy gas to go to our regular home church west of Bern. And I always enjoyed it. We had an older lady. I thought she was real old, but I'm sure she wasn't. An older lady was our Sunday school teacher, and she was very, very good, and she would have us come down to her house. She just lived about a half a mile from this church, and she would have us come on Sunday afternoon for a picnic, and we'd play ball and just have a real nice time. One of the boys in our Sunday school class was a boy that I had a crush on. He was in my class in high school, and he was really a smart guy. He got all hundreds of 100% in everything, but he moved when he became a sophomore, and I was glad he did then, because I would never have been able to beat out our salutatory in our school if he'd stayed.
And this is where the revival.
Oh yes, one year they had a revival meeting in this church that lasted quite a while. Back in those years, revivals would last anywhere from 1 to 5 weeks, depending on if people were still getting saved. And Grandma Kloppenstein had prayed and prayed and prayed for her children. And during a revival meeting in this church, 7 of her children went to the altar and got right with the Lord, and she was so, so happy. This is Aunt Aldine and her husband, Homer Ginter. Aunt Aldine was a real sweet lady with a lot of problems. She lived to be 43, and in her married life she had 9 children. She would get very depressed sometimes, and one time tried to commit suicide, but she was rescued and lived quite a while longer, and then died of cancer. Uncle Homer, he was a real musician. He played guitar, and when we'd go visit on a Sunday afternoon, he'd get out the guitar and we'd have a sing-along, and he was real active in the church, but he was an uncle that gave me the creeps. He wasn't very kind to his children, and one time he tried to run over one of the boys with a car, and one time the water tank where the horses watered was frozen over in the winter, and he chopped a hole in the ice and dunked one of his boys in for punishment. Every morning he would line them up on the porch and make them drink a glass of warm milk fresh from the cows, and that's enough to make you sick. After Aunt Aldine died, then he married a school teacher who had never been married, and she's still living today. She's close to 99 years old, lives in a nursing home in Decatur, and I call her my aunt because she really likes our family. And she and Uncle Homer had one child, and she was a mongoloid, and she died when she was in her 40s. She was finally had to go to a nursing home. Her mother took care of her all the years, and then she had to go into a nursing home and died then. But she also said that Uncle Homer was not a good husband.
Sorry, no, that's fine.
They had 9 children, and when Aunt Aldine died, the children were all very, very young. Miriam was the oldest, and she raised the children. And then when Aunt Aldine died, he wanted to marry the third daughter, Marcella, who was a very pretty girl, and he said he loved her and wanted to marry her, and she was so perturbed by that she had been going with a fellow just a very short time, but she married him when she was very young, just to get out of the home and away from her dad. They didn't raise all their children, 2 of them. One died in childbirth, and another one died young. This is my Aunt Emma. Aunt Emma was married to Don Burroughs, who was a minister, and they had a church in Fort Wayne in a store building. The church was in the forefront of the building, and Aunt Emma and her husband had an apartment in the back of the building. They had 3 little children, 2 boys and a girl, and they had a revival meeting at the church, and a lady who came for the revival meeting, played the piano and had charge of the music, and then she just stayed on, and Uncle Francis liked her, and he ran off with her and left Aunt Emma and the little children. My mom used to help them a lot with food and other things. And then she took care of Melvin Melanie and his wife. His wife was very ill, and she took care of them. And then his wife died, and then she married Melvin, who was 19 years older than she was. He had one daughter. And then Aunt Emma and Uncle Melvin had a daughter together. But he didn't like so many little children, and so he wanted to get rid of little Bob. And Bob then went to live with Melvin's sister, and she raised him, and she was very good to him, but he never quite forgave his mother for giving him up and sending him off with some other parents. Bob is still living. He's not very well. Her son Don has died. Her two daughters married Mormons, and one lives in Texas and one lives in Tennessee, and they are Mormons yet today, although they say they love God and they feel that they are right with the Lord, but that it is up to the Lord. He knows their hearts. Aunt Amanda was the oldest living child of Peter and Mary. She married Fred Roth. They lived in Fort Wayne on what I think now is Old Decatur Road. She was a very, very nice aunt, and we'd go to Fort Wayne about twice a year to do shopping for spring clothes and winter clothes, and she would always have us come and stay at her house, and we'd stay overnight. She was a very, very nice aunt, but she died quite young too of cancer. And then Uncle Fred remarried, and he married a lady who was my home ec teacher at Monroe High School. And they lived together for quite a while, and then she divorced him. And he had built a home in Fort Wayne on Rudisill, East Rudisill, which is still standing. They lived there a while, and then she divorced him and moved quite close, only across the other side of the street on Rudisill. This is Uncle Noah. We always called him Uncle Noy. We never called him Noah. And he married Lucille. Uncle Noah and Uncle Henry were brothers, and they married sisters. Aunt Lucille and Aunt Phyllis were sisters. And Uncle Noah had rheumatism really bad in his knees and his hands. They were all crippled up, and he couldn't stand the dampness around Indiana, so he moved out to Arizona, and he wanted her to move out there with him, but she didn't want to go to Arizona, so she stayed in Fort Wayne, and he went out there. Uncle Noah was a minister too, and had a church for quite some time. They had two daughters. The two daughters lived with Aunt Lucille for a little while, and then they went out with Uncle Noah and lived with him the rest of their lives. And they married men out there and had their families, and one of the daughters is gone now. She's died, and the other one we hear from a lot. But Aunt Lucille and Aunt Phyllis both had Alzheimer's and died. They were very sweet aunts. I really, really liked them, and we often were in their home when I was a little girl. They lived on Pontiac Street in Fort Wayne, and we would often go over to the reservoir on Calhoun. Is the reservoir on Clinton? Calhoun? Was it one in between those two or something? We'd climb the hill and play and had a good time. Aunt Lucille lived in Fort Wayne on East Rudisville, several blocks east of Arby's, and she had a nice house, but it was amazing. You wouldn't believe all the vases and the antique lamps and all kinds of things she had. She had so many things in her living room that you just had a little path in the living room, because all four walls came out about 3 to 4 feet with stuff piled. She had things hanging on her wall, antique pictures and things, from floor to ceiling, a solid mass of pictures all around. And in the dining room, the walls were exactly the same, and in the kitchen, and every cupboard she had was just filled with antique dishes and antique this and that. You went there and you never could, well, you just couldn't stop looking because she had so many things. But when she died, they had an auction, and I wanted something to remember Aunt Lucille by, so I bought this antique vase at the sale, and I'm really glad I bought it. I've certainly enjoyed it. I don't know what they did with some of the things, if they sold everything or not, but they probably took some to Goodwill or Mission if they didn't. But someone else lives in the house now. I also got a second vase from her, which you'll see. And it is Roseville, piece of Roseville, which is very expensive now. My mother wanted me to buy a vase for her, and so I bought these two vases, spent money on these two vases, and then she decided she didn't want a vase, so I inherited both of them. Roseville pottery is now in antique malls, and it's very, very expensive. So I appreciate these two remembrances from Aunt Lucille.
What do you have?
Except, like if we had a picture like this and I'd point out who Aunt Babe is.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
When my Aunt Babe died, I wanted some keepsake from her, so I went to her auction too and bought salt and pepper shakers with violets on. I like to buy things with violets on because that's my name, and I thought this would be a wonderful remembrance of Aunt Babe. She was probably one of my favorite aunts. And these are the salt and pepper shakers that I got at her sale. At my Aunt Tilly's sale, after she died, I got sheets, but I've worn those out.
Again?
Grandpa and Grandma Kloppenstein had only 4 children who lived a long, long time, and these are those 4. Aunt Tilly is on the bottom right, and Aunt Babe is standing behind her. They both lived into their 80s, and both of them died of cancer. And then my Uncle Henry lived to be almost 100 years old, and my mom is now 98 and a half years old. All the rest of the children, 11 children, died much younger. This was taken in Layman's Park in Bern, Indiana. What does that red say? Oh, 1934.
You can start.
This was taken at our home in Lynn Grove, Indiana, after we left the farm, after we had lived with Grandma and Grandpa Egley. And this is my father, Valentine, and my mother, Ida, and my sister, Cloetta, on the left, and Violet, and Glenivere at the bottom. My mother made these dresses for us. She always got red, always made us red dresses when I was a little girl. And Aunt Glenivere, I used to always curl her hair or wave it. She'd say, "Make me waves," because Aunt Babe taught me how to wave a little girl's hair. And so here she doesn't have waves, but she has curls here. This was taken in 1934. This was taken at the same time, only here we're making some funny faces. My mother, I wanted to pin my hair back, and my mother always would pull the bobby pin out and make me wear it like this, and for some reason or other I just hated it this way. This is where we lived in Lynn Grove, right across from the grade school. And you want me to tell the coat story? This is the back of the house, and directly across the front of the house was our schoolhouse, and we used to play with some neighbors, the Dubois. I think Mother mentioned the Dubois when Carolyn was born. And she had just gotten our winter coats dry cleaned, and we didn't have any plate coats, and we had just this one coat, and she had gotten them clean. We went over to Dubois, and it had been raining, and the Dubois girl and boy, Fern and Glenn, told Cloyd and me to slide down the hill. It was a lot of fun. They had a hill in their backyard, and it would be a lot of fun. There wasn't any grass on the hill. It was just muddy. And so we believed them, and we thought they were going to follow us, but they didn't follow us, so we slid down the hill and got our coats all muddy. Well, we didn't want to go home because we knew what would happen when we got home, so we went over to the school, and they had an alcove in the outside of the building, an alcove that you could stand in. And we had little umbrellas, and we opened the umbrellas and put them up in front of us to enclose the alcove, and we thought we'd stand there until it was dry. Now, this alcove faced our house. And then finally Mother called us home, and our coats weren't dry yet. So we went home, and Mother took the coats off, and she made us pull up our dresses and pull down our panties and lay across the chair, and she spanked us really good with a razor strap. She had a way of slapping us with the razor strap and then pulling on it so it really burned. And then we cried and cried, of course, and she sent us to bed without any supper. But she made a big mistake of always sending us to the same room, and after we'd get done crying and it didn't hurt anymore, then we would laugh and play together. This was, we moved up to the Amish soon after Carolyn was born. Carolyn was born in Lynn Grove. And then we moved up by the Amish, south and east of Monroe, and Mom wanted a family picture taken. That was a navy blue dress with white trim. She got it at some kind of a sale. Somebody was having a sale and she got it, and I always thought it was so pretty. Her hair was waved like that. Aunt Babe would taught how to wave her hair. And here, our dresses were red again, red and white. We always had red and white. And Guinevere, looks like I didn't curl her hair there. She's really got straight hair there, my father. This was taken, family picture, when I was 21 years old. Cloetta and I have dresses made alike. My Aunt Sarah Egley, who lived in Fort Wayne, made all our dresses that we used to wear to sing, because Cloetta and I and Ruth Sherling sang in a trio at Fort Wayne Bible College, and those were the dresses. That was always the very favorite dress I think I've ever owned. I just love that. Guinevere, over on the left here, is standing on catalogs to make her a little taller so she looks more our height. And I think that's one of the better pictures of my dad. And that's Carolyn. I always combed her hair in long curls. She wanted curls, and so I would always wrap her hair around my finger and make her long curls. Here we had Lester and Al. So at this particular time, we were living in that red brick house that is on the video that we saw in Monroe. And it was just the year before I got married.
Go ahead.
I just wanted Grandma to tell us how she waved,
Aunt Guinevere's hair?
yeah, and did the curls for Aunt Carolyn.
For Guinevere, after we washed her hair, we would put some kind of gel. You want me to hold the picture? Can you?
I'll zoom in on it.
Okay. We would put some kind of a gel on her hair. It was sort of gooey, and rub it in real good in the hair, and then I would comb her hair down straight and push the hair with a comb back this way, and then bring it out this way, and then
Focus on her.
Sorry.
I would comb her hair down straight, and then I would push her hair this way, and then push it back, and then push it forward again, and so you'd have waves going like this. And then when it dried, it would have body to it, and you could loosen your waves up a little, or you could leave a clamp to your head.
Wait, so how did you make them stay?
You had this gel type of thing that you put on your hair. You worked it into your hair,
Okay.
and then you combed your hair down straight, and then you pushed your hair with a comb, you combed it back and forward and back and forward.
And it just stayed with the
and
gel?
it stayed with that gel. And then when the gel dried, you either, Glenniver used to like to just keep it clamped to her head, but you could loosen it a little bit, you know, so it was just a little softer, and the waves would stay in.
And that's how Grandma Igley has her hair?
Yeah, you can see how it looks, Grandma Igley's hair there. Hers is waved. Not, is it on this picture that it's waved, or on one of the other pictures?
Here it is.
That picture, there.
There we go.
Mm-hmm. There you have waves, and I used to do Glenniver's hair like that.
And then now you have to tell us how you do it.
And then Aunt Carola has long curls in her hair. Her hair was sort of naturally curly anyway, but I would, after, while it was wet, I would take a portion of her hair and wrap it around my finger, and just wrap it around my finger and slide my finger out, and it would stay. You'd have this gel on it too, you know, the gel that you put on it. I don't know if they make that kind of gel anymore or not. And then I would just go all around her head that way, and she'd have these long curls, and they just would stay for a long time because they were sort of on the stiff order.
What kind of gel was it?
I don't know what kind of gel they used to have. I can see it in my mind, and it was, what did it feel like? Sort of slimy stuff, but you worked it into your hair, and you didn't see it at all then when you worked it into your hair, like you would work mousse into your hair. And mousse gives it body, and that gel gave it body. I suppose you could use mousse on your hair and do the same thing. But and then my father, I had a great aunt who always cut my father's hair, and then my father learned to cut hair, and he would cut all of our heads of hair, and then I learned from him how to cut hair, and that's like I cut your dad's hair and Gary's hair and Grandpa's hair from the time we moved to Cleveland until today. I still, and I cut a lot of college kids' hair and so forth. I hate to cut hair anymore, but I always cut my sister's hair and
How'd you get your hair like that?
what did I look like there? Can you
Yeah, I can see.
show it? You put your hair up in curlers. They weren't the kind now that your hair sticks to it. You've seen like brush. They almost look like brushy kind. They were curlers with clamps on, and you'd roll your hair up in curlers, clamps on. When I was younger in high school, I had an iron, a curling iron that I would curl my hair with. The only trouble is it only lasted one day, you know, and then it was out again because I never had a perm until after I was married. I never had a perm. But I would roll it up in these little rollers, and
Just hairspray it?
we never heard about hairspray.
Hairspray?
Never heard of hairspray when I was young. When we got married, I took them off because I
Say that
thought
again.
I looked better.
You.
I wore glasses from the time I was 7 years old, so I think I always said I was born with glasses on. And I always said it made my nose ache because I didn't like the weight of them when I was a little girl, but then I got used to them. But when I got married, I took my glasses off for the pictures because I thought I looked better without glasses than with glasses. Now I wear glasses because I have bags under my eyes because I have to have glasses, definitely.
1, 2, 3.
When we lived in Monroe, we went to a little church on Wednesday nights, Cloetta and I did, because we didn't have enough money to go down to our home church. And this church would have revival meetings, and they would really preach on outward appearance, on your hair and on your dress and on wearing jewelry and things. So I got real convicted, and I went out then and bought what they called a rat. It was a long, sort of a round thing that would stick to your hair, and I would stick it around my head and roll up my hair on it, and then I thought that I was real religious. But it took me so long to get my hair wrapped around the rat and to keep it so the rat didn't show, that I would have spent a lot less time if I'd have just left my hair short and curly. But I began to look at other people, and I saw theirs wasn't like that, and I thought, well, they aren't as religious as I am. And then the Lord really spoke to me about how long it took me to put it up and how proud I was getting because I had my hair fixed that way. So I threw the rat away, and I went back to normal hair again. We sang in a trio together. Ruth Sherling is on the left, and my sister Cloetta in the middle, and I'm on the right, and my aunt, Sarah Egley, made these dresses. She always made us a new outfit each year or for each season to wear when we'd sing when we were students at Iowa College. I think this was Grandpa Peter Kloppenstein's, one of his first cars, an old Model T Ford of some kind. And my mom, Ida, is sitting on the running board, and boy, I'm not sure, that's Aunt Aldine, and well, Aunt Emma's sitting down behind the men, and that must be Aunt Aldine and Babe. I'd have to look at the back of the picture. Sitting in it, and my grandpa with a mustache, and Aunt Tilly on the front. I hope they didn't drive around like that.
This is Gary Ringenberg. I'd like to order 5 pizza.
This is my
with
mom and dad, Valentine Abraham
ham,
Egley,
mushroom.
and Ida Kloppenstein Egley, and that's Violet. That's me when I was just a baby yet, little girl. My father, when he was born, my grandpa wanted to name him Moses Abraham, and Grandma didn't like that very well, so they named him Valentine Abraham because he was born on Valentine's Day. And so most of his life he was known as Tiny. I call him Uncle Tiny, or people who knew him always called him Tiny.
How tall was he?
5'7". That's when my father was a baby. My father was the only one in his family who went to high school, and he felt privileged that he could go to high school. Aunt Amanda is the one who said he had to go because somebody had to go to high school from their family, and she insisted that he be the one to go. When he was a senior, his folks took him out of school and went to California for about 3 months, and he came back and took the tests and got one of the highest scores in the class. So I thought my dad was pretty smart. He did a lot of dumb things sometimes in his life, but he was smart.
Now we're presenting
This is Abraham Egley, my grandfather, and Grandma Leah Stuckey Egley on their 50th wedding anniversary in 1933. They were 70 years old, and I thought they always looked old, and I really think here they look older than 70 too. They're in the middle, Grandma and Grandpa, and then all the children, his children were there. They're up in the upper rows. To the right is Uncle Harvey, and right below him is his wife Adele, and then my dad Valentine and my mom Ida right below him. My Uncle Simon Egley and their daughter Juanita, who was a Mongoloid, and his wife Sarah. And then Uncle Ben Sprunger and my dad's sister below him, Amanda. And then my Uncle Chris, who died when he was in his 30s, and his wife Helen, Aunt Helen. And then Uncle Jesse and their son Glenn and his wife Ida. And then beside is my great aunt Rachel Klopfenstein, and another aunt, Fanny Mosier, and her husband standing behind him. And this is one of the husbands of one of Grandpa's sisters. Down on the bottom, the children were the grandchildren. My little sister Glenavere and myself, and my sister Cloetta. And these are my cousins, Uncle Jesse's daughters, Marion, and the second one is Dorothy. She was the one who was born the same day I was born, the same year too, so we were Egley twins. And then my cousin, Bob Egley, and I guess this is Mary. This is my, this is Mary, and my twin is Dorothy there that's smiling beside of Bob. Behind her is Harriet, and then Jean, the adult with a white collar, and beside her on this other direction, is her brother Carl Egley. They were sister and brother, and Carl is one who came out and helped Grandpa farm, and we really enjoyed getting to know him, and he's the one that taught Cloetta and I how to whistle. We'd sit in the barn overlooking the cows and swing our little legs, and he would teach us how to whistle. This is first cousin Harriet Egley, the girl beside of Jean, and then her sister. They had a whole bunch of kids, Alice, and below there is Alan and Lois. Those are all sisters and brothers, and then down below there is Donald Egley. He was Uncle Chris's son. That was a special day, and it was taken outside the house that I lived in until I was 8 years old, out west and south of Bern, Indiana. And it was about 40 rods from the Wabash River. Cloetta and I used to love to walk down to the Wabash River when we were little girls, and we'd walk along the river, and I used to tell her that when I grew up, I wanted to have a boyfriend and walk along the river. Well, when Gerald and I began dating, we could only walk as far as Foster Park in the hour that we had for dating, and we walked along a river. So I got my wish. For a while, Uncle Chris and his wife Helen and baby Bob lived at Grandma's, and they helped Grandma and Grandpa Egley farm, and that's Grandma Egley and Grandpa Egley, and the young man on the right is my father, and I don't know who the lady is here. But there's a motorcycle on here, and I didn't know they made motorcycles back then. A Harley Davis?
Harley Davidson.
Harley
Davidson.
Davidson? That was many, many years ago. This is a four-generation picture. The lady on the left is my great-grandma Stookie, and the man is Uncle Simon, the oldest son of my grandparents, my dad's oldest brother, and their baby, and this little baby died, never grew up to live long, and that one on the right is my grandma, Leah Stookie Egley. This is the back side of the house. My great-grandpa, Bishop Henry Egley, who started the Evangelical Mennonite denomination, built a log cabin on this and brought his family here, and then he built this house, which was a very large house, and my grandparents lived on this half of the house, and when we lived with them, we lived on the back, what you can't see, it would be the front half of the house. This house was very special to me. On the left, there was a porch, and that's where my grandpa would take Cloetta and I, and we'd sit on the porch, and he would teach us hymns, not choruses, but whole hymns out of the hymn book, and he would always tell us about Jesus and how much Jesus loved us, and so I can't remember the time when I didn't love Jesus. This porch here went into their kitchen. They had a great big kitchen. And this was a very nice house. It had walnut ceilings, wood ceilings that were pure walnut. And it had chair rail around the our kitchen walls and around their walls, and that was all solid walnut too. And then the people who bought the house, they found up in the attic many big planks of walnut. And so now they have a whole china cabinet across the dining room wall that's solid walnut. And they took the wainscoting off, but some other people who had lived in the house after Grandma's left painted it. And by the time they scraped it off, that walnut was too thin to use for anything other. So they made a kitchen floor. They made their kitchen floor of walnut pieces.
Could you tell us what that pole is to the right that we're looking at?
Well, there's a windmill pump clear to the right. Can you see that sort of a thing? Goodness, I don't remember what that was. I don't remember seeing that, but it was there, I guess. In the front of the house, outside of the fence, we had a rail that was to tie horses to, you know, and they had horse and buggy. And Cloyd and I, we used to do a lot of flip-flops on that and hang from that. We had more fun. And they had a barn that had a hill going up into the barn. We called it a bank barn, and we used to get on a little wagon and coast down, or we'd get in a tire, curl up in a tire and roll down the hill. And when Roger and Dorcas and Gary got bigger, and the Erdl children, we wanted them to see where we grew up, and we said, now they have a wonderful bank barn, and we used to roll down this hill. And on the side they had wood, or not wood, cement, and like steps to hold the ground in place, and we would go on these steps, and as we got older we would jump off, and oh, it was so high, you know, we were really daring. Well, we took these kids out there, they were grown, we took them out there and we said, now we want to show you this bank. It goes up into the barn. We couldn't find it. I mean, it was such a tiny little hill, and we stepped on the step. I mean, you just barely stepped on it. And the top step, we could step up on the top step. And they said, well, Mom, where's this wonderful hill you used to slide down? Where are these steps you used to jump off? But they were looking at them as an adult. I was looking at them, remembering them as a little child. We had an outdoor toilet. We never had electricity in this house. We had an outdoor toilet. Under a mulberry tree, mind you. In the summertime, you got purple feet when you went to the bathroom toilet. This was Grandpa's oldest son, Jesse, and his wife, Ida Egley. And she lived down the lane from Grandma's house in a house. And by the time we lived there, this house was kind of old and tumbly, and we used to like to go play there, and there'd be rats in it or mice in it. And we played, pretended there were ghosts in the house. It's now fixed up and people live in it, but that's where Aunt Ida lived when she dated Uncle Jesse.
It's nice too.
They're the ones that had a whole raft of kids, and they lived in Illinois, and their children still live out in Illinois. My Uncle Jesse was a very short person too, and Aunt Amanda. Aunt Ida. This is my dad's only sister, Aunt Amanda, and she married a man by the name of John Hershey, but they weren't married, I don't know, very few years until he died, and then she remarried, and she married Ben Sprunger. Uncle Ben owned a shoe store in Bern, and he was a very, very nice man, and they lived in a great big house in Bern. It was they had an apartment upstairs where my first cousin Jean and her husband lived after they were married, and we just loved that great big mansion of a house. Aunt Amanda was a very sweet, sweet person, and she's the one, when she died, she willed a lot of money to Jamaica, to JTS to buy land and a couple of houses on the land that were on the land. Uncle Ben and Aunt Amanda then went into Swiss Village, and they both died very, very old. This is Aunt Amanda and Uncle Ben. This is in front of their house. It is now a house for people who can live together. They need to be supervised, but they can live together, and they have a number of people living in the house for that purpose.
Okay, kind of like a group home.
Yeah, like a group home. If I said Uncle Jesse was their oldest child, he was their second child. The oldest one was here, Uncle Simon. Confused on that. And Aunt Sarah Aunt Sarah lived in Leo. She was born and raised up in the Leo area. I don't know how they ever got together, but I really loved Aunt Sarah, and she's the one, when we were in Bible college, we'd go there a lot for supper, and she's the one who made all our dresses for our trio. They had a child that died, and then they had a daughter, Eva. She's still living, and then they had the daughter who was a Mongoloid, and back then you didn't train Mongoloids. You didn't teach them to talk, you didn't teach them to do any work. All she did was just sat. It was sad. She's still living in Florida in a home. This is Uncle Harvey. He was 10 years older than my dad, and they always lived in the Bern area. He's the father of Carl and Jean. And when Carolyn was born, Carl and Jean were delighted. They thought Mom named Carolyn, her name is Carolyn Jean, and so they said it was like Carl and Jean, you know. And his wife, that's his wedding picture, and he married Aunt Adele. And I thought she was a pretty ritzy lady. Now, Aunt Adele had polio, and when I was in the 8th grade, between the 8th grade and freshman year, and freshman and sophomore year, I worked for her in the summers, and I got $1.50 a week. I gave 75 cents home to my folks to help them out, and I kept 75 cents. And I would have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and get breakfast for Uncle Harvey and Jean and Carl before they go to work. And I had to clean the house. I did all the cooking. I did canning. I did baking and wash and iron. And she always wanted. And every day I had to clean the house, run the dust mop around and dust the furniture. And I had to be done by after lunch so that I could sit out on a porch swing in the afternoon with her. She'd be in her wheelchair and I'd be on the porch. And one funny thing happened one night. They had an outdoor toilet, and I had to go to the bathroom before I went to bed, and it was dark out, and I hated to go all the way out because it was clear across the yard. And they had sort of a hill in their yard, and I thought, well, I'll just squat down here and go and wet. And I just got squatted down when a flashlight flashed in my face, and here Carl was out getting night crawlers to go fishing. Oh, I was mortified. I just acted like I'm just sitting out there, and then I went in the house. Of course, he probably knew what I was out there for, but I was so embarrassed. That was awful. This is Grandpa Abraham Egley and Grandma Leah and their family when they were a lot younger. That's Harvey. No, yeah, and Chris is down here, the little one. No, that's Jess and Amanda and Harvey and Uncle Simon. And then my dad, Valentine, was the little one, and Uncle Chris was standing right behind him. This would have been taken a long time ago because my dad was just little on here. And he was born in 1903. My grandpa, well, my dad too had a beautiful tenor voice, and my grandpa had a beautiful tenor voice, and he was the song leader at Westboro Missionary Church for 40 years. And he was song leader before they ever even had pianos, and so he would teach them the tune of the songs by Do, Re, Mi, and until they learned the tune of the songs. And this is Grandpa's, or these are Grandpa's sisters. Grandma's sisters. Which one? I'd have to look at the back of the picture. These are Grandma, these are all Grandma's sisters and brothers. And this is Grandma and Grandpa outside the house where I lived. This was before their 50th wedding anniversary, about a couple of years before they celebrated their 50th anniversary. My grandpa had a series of little mini strokes. he got so, all he wanted to eat for breakfast was pears and what we called galeric, which is pickled pig feet. That was his breakfast.
Yummy.
When Grandma had, this isn't a rose bush here. These are something, I have a bush outside here. I can't think of the name of it right now, but she had a rose bush with little roses on. There were 7 to one little stem called 7 Sister Roses. And Cloetta and I didn't have a lot of toys, but we would cut pictures out of a catalog. We'd cut out a mom and a dad and children and a lot of furniture, and then we'd lay the furniture out and make rooms, and then we'd play. And if any of those got torn, oh, we'd cry because that was so sad. It was like somebody dying. Well, one day Grandma was gone, and we decided to play outdoors, and so we saw these roses, and we thought they'd make real nice borders to form rooms on the ground. So we tore off these roses, and we made living rooms and dining rooms and bedrooms and kitchens, and then put our furniture inside, and then we still had roses left over. We hadn't pulled all the roses off the bush yet, so we lined up the sidewalk and made so the sidewalk looked real pretty. We put it in the crack and all around the sidewalk, and when Grandma came home, there wasn't a rose on the bush. Grandma was very patient with us, and she was a very good grandma to us, but that day, she punished us by flipping our hands. This is what she did. And we cried and cried, and we never picked another rose. But I can just imagine how disappointed she was because she loved flowers, and here she came home to a rose bush that didn't have any roses on it anymore.
Okay.
Well, this is a time when some of the grandchildren and their daddies and mamas came to visit Grandma, and Cloetta is the one you can only see part of her face in the background, and I'm sitting next to Cloetta, and then one of my Uncle Jess's daughters, and we have Donald and Max Egley on the front, Uncle Chris's sons, and Glenn and Alan Egley, Uncle Jess's sons, and 2 more of Uncle Jess's daughters. So they must have been out from Illinois at that time, because that's where they lived all the time. Here we are at Grandma's again. Donald Egley on the right, Uncle Chris's son, middle son. He was about my age, a little bit older. And then the next little girl is Violet, me, and Harriet Egley, and her brother Glenn, and a little sister. That must be Dorothy and Marion down here, and Max Egley and Cloetta making a little face. That's when we still lived at Grandma's house. Look at the little stars. Little bloomers on one girl. Donald is the one, he used to get us out in the barn, and he's the one on the far left. He would dare us to walk up in a haymow and go across beams. And one time he got Cloetta and I to go down to the Wabash River, and my dad had a boat down there, and we didn't want to get in the boat because it had some water in it. It had a leak in it and had some water in it, but he talked us into it. And of course, by the time the 3 of us got in, it got some more water in it, and my mother didn't know where we were. She was just frantic. She hunted all over for us, and finally she came down to the river, and there we were out on the water. We couldn't get back to the shore, and Cloetta and I each got our spankings, but she didn't say anything to Donald, and we always thought she should have spanked him too, because he's the one that talked us into going down there. He's in heaven today. My Aunt Amanda was really a giving person, and she especially liked Cloetta and I because we were in the Lord's service. And just out of the blue, I don't know why she chose me, but she gave me this little rocker, which is it folds up. But Aunt Amanda, were she living today, would be 111 years old, and my grandma and Grandpa Abraham and Leah, her parents, gave this to her when she was just a little girl, so she could have a rocker in her bedroom. And so I inherited it, and I cherish it today. It's over 100 years old. And that's Aunt Amanda who gave it to me. And she's with Uncle Ben in front of their house in Bern, Indiana.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. Grandpa got sick in November when I was 16 years old, and when he was laying on his deathbed, he called Cloetta and I in and wanted us to sing for him the song, Hallelujah, What a Savior Who Can Save a Poor Lost Sinner, Lift Him from the Miry Clay and Set Him Free. So she and I sang that whole song for him. It's one that he taught us when we were little girls. And then a few months later, my grandma went to live then with my Aunt Amanda, and they took her down to Florida for the winter, but they never got to Florida. They got as far as Georgia, were in a car accident. She broke her hip, went into the hospital, and died just a few months after Grandpa did. And I was very sad. Well, after she died, Aunt Amanda took a lot of Grandma's dishes home with her, and later on then she divided them between all of the grandchildren, and she gave our family 6 different gifts that belonged to Grandma and Grandpa, and this was one of the gifts. All of my siblings wanted this one, but we put numbers on all the gifts, and then we drew numbers. They wanted me to draw first since I was the oldest, but I said no. I'll draw last. Let Al start. So they all drew and got the gifts that matched the numbers, and it ended up that I got this dish that everyone else wanted. So I was just really, really excited and happy. I've never used the dish, but I have it in my cupboard, and I always enjoy it, knowing that it was from Grandma Leah Egley.